This is the part about Grundtvig as a romantic and the romanticism in his time. This is built on the book of Anders Holm, Grundtvig, an introduction, that's been translated in several languages. I have translated it into Arabic, hoping to be published. And so it's an inspiring, good book. And this is a picture from that chapter about him in the times of the Romanticism. And he was much younger then than the picture that I'm showing otherwise. But I will keep doing so to show also the development in his look and character. Grundtvig was a father for the Danish nation, an important figure to be looked at and understood, because he's a gate also to understand the Danish identity and had left a lasting imprint, as I have talked about in the introduction earlier. So let's go ahead and talk about him as this romantic person who writes poems and express ideas about what he is seeing around him. It's a lot like we can see from these big poems in England and in Europe at that time, trying to use the nature and the spirit that we can feel in nature to become conscious of it and of ourselves and our belief at the same time, or the love we are feeling for something or someone. And just to get an understanding, at that time, in the beginning of the 1800s and the midst of 1800, like from 18 to 1820, this movement was kicking in called Romanticism, in opposition to what was called rationalism that came with the Enlightenment age. It was about turning to an inward way of understanding life and expressing it, because rationality itself and the ideas itself could not totally encompass these ideas. So we had ways to express things through history, poetry, songs, ideas that applied to the identity and awareness of who persons are, and not only to the rational thinking and systemizing everything in nature sciences and in very small, what can you say, objective look at comparing objective ideas with each other. We are also a living being that has feelings, and these feelings has an impact on our life. So it's the experience that comes from that inner feeling in contact with nature and culture and life that's also important and is in focus here. And it's from that these romantics has seen that, well, the great spirit emerges from this in the individual and in the community, in the people as well. So these spirits that's based on the fantasy, the feeling, they belong to the human, just like the reason. This is what he says: fantasy and feeling are as well part of the good human as the idea and the mind or rationality. And the idea behind this romanticism is to find an eternal kind of harmony in life, that there are balances out there we have to find it, and it's through the unconscious that we have with us that we can get to these parts of life where we can get this harmony and live with it. And it's also focused on a lot of contradictions, like light and darkness, day and night, life and death, truth and lie. And this dualistic way of these contradictions really was part of that movement that was called Romanticism. And mostly in Germany, it was represented by Fichte and Schelling and Herder, three names that had an impact on literature at that time and the Romantic movements. And so they inspired him, but he didn't really totally give himself into that movement altogether. He was inspired by it, but he also had his doubts and his criticism, because he didn't see God as part of nature. It was not a pantheism for him. There was a personal God that was detached from reality, but in contact with it in other ways. So he was holding on to that monotheistic view of the Christian faith and the dogmas of his belief. And so trying to combine it with these inspirational movements and trying to find a way through it. And so he goes all the way back as part of this idea, inspiration. And he goes and writes a very great book calls the mythology of the North. And in this book, he is really unfolding this ideal of how history and the spirit of it is a lasting impact that can have a big importance for the living and how they develop and understand themselves and become something big and huge and something unique and special. But he wasn't really all into that humans could do all that alone. So he said, well, yes, to some part, but it needed the inspiration of God and the help of God to get to that big power. It's by God's mercy and that spirit that God sends into humans that's gonna help them develop in the way they need to. They cannot do it alone. And so he turned this movement in his own head, making it as an inspiration for developing that prophetic voice of him, talking through the spirit, feelings, history, poems, the connection with nature, the eternal spirit in the humans, the need for growing into eternity as a way of delivering God's message into all this, and not only delivering the humans' ability to do this on their own, but saying all this connects you in the end with God, and it's God's passion and love for you that will bring you on, and this is that connection of spirit that's really the great one. And so he starts writing a lot of poems and songs, and so he says a lot of things underway in that. And to sum it up, he's saying all this in the mythology of the North in a quote that's put here by the author Anders Holm, saying, well, the human is a unique, special, and very enlightened creature that the powers of God are working in to develop and make real. And so it can last through thousands of ages and in thousands of family lives, to show that God has made this experiment that's showing how spirit and dust can work through each other and become the common ground for consciousness. He means the human that gets this godly consciousness in it by the discovering of that uniqueness of combining the dirt with the spirit from God, the dirt from earth. That means the human body with the human soul. And in that way, he tried to find the way between the two ideas that, well, human is only materialistic, is only kind of body, and the conscience is nothing but processes of the mind, and between the idea that's saying, well, humans are actually a spirit and everything is an illusion, there is no real body life. But he believes it's a combination, and that's the experiment of God, making this human both spirit and dust, he said. In this second part, we're going to follow Grundtvig falling in love with the lady of the house where he gone to teach. He was in his youth, got a position, and then it was in 1805, and then he fell in love with Constance Lust, this lady that was 8 years older than him and married to the man in the house, and he was very shocked that he could fall in love with a married lady. And here she is. She's that beautiful lady, her picture in the book of Anders Holm, trying to talk from. And what was most shocking from Grundtvig in that is that he was from a family of Christian morals and ideas that he should not look to the wife of others, and so falling in love with her so madly and getting out of his skin, just wanting to see her and be with her, was too much for him. And so he says, there I am in the heights of the midnight, and what's going on inside and outside me. And he talks about how he looks at her eyes and he cannot really find the peace that he wants anymore. When I came here, I could see in that woman's eyes what was all the words of the books of the word against that. From them I could learn what was so dear to me, from the sight of her on me, with tenderness looking back, resting on my look. and view. And so he was, in many ways, really shocked by the way he fell in love with her, wanting a way out. And so he turned to God. First, he turned to nature. He could see like all his senses awakened by the nature around him, and how the storms and the winds and the sea and everything storming him in ways he have never experienced before. He could not focus on the deed that he was there to do, and he say, I came here to do the good thing, to fulfill my deed. And where is it? Where is my happiness in this? So, in many ways, he's lost his senses, and he's totally overtaken by this madness of love in that period. And to find a way out, he turns to writing about the incident and the love story, but also about how his feelings are so sensitive when it comes to looking at her, understanding what's going on inside him. And he could see that no morals and no ideas were really able to give his will that power. And so he says, well, my life now is a kind of powerless will that cannot tame that sea of love and its drops. And we get from that, and much more he's writing. This is just a short way of saying he really couldn't get out of that love story and the complications in it, because she's a married woman and he will have great troubles doing anything. And so he tries to put himself in that situation, saying, I am just looking and enjoying, but I would never do something wrong. But even that was not enough. And so he starts trying to find his way out of that by looking to God and trying to find the help of that. And so he starts seeing God everywhere. And he writes a big poem, Strandbakken ved Øylykke. It's the hill by the sea in Øylykke, that place that he was living in. And it was a very beautiful poem where he gives life to everything about him. Everything that he sees becomes, in many ways, a sight into himself as well. And so in the end, he starts saying that, well, you who are up there over the stars in the height, I will praise your name and honor, and you have sent me what hurt my heart, and thank you for sending me this pain, and you made me wise by so. Taking me in that way made me wise, because now I understand what can happen to me if I get lost in this trait of falling in love in that way, and I have to fall in love with you and your creation and what would you want from me. So he say, now I found you, and this heart, I found the madness, and I also found the cleverness. And so he's circling around God's help and the salvation in many ways. And that can be misunderstood by people, like saying, well, is he gone crazy, or why can't he just give in for that love? First of all, well, that's not what he sees is right, and it's out of the nature of the human to want the woman of the other man, and he has to go to great lengths to control himself not to do so and follow the feelings that is taking him towards her. And so to do what he couldn't do, to take control of his will and his feelings, he writes, and he makes this beautiful poem that he really is crying himself out of that pain, and he has to get detached from her by something stronger, and there is nothing stronger in the love of a woman than the love for the God. And so he turns his face towards serving that idea of showing God's presence in life, not as something that is part of everything around him, but as that God that really make everything magical in life and can be felt and touched through the contact with the nature that's created by that God. And so he want to use his heart and tongue and ideas for that. Later on in that same period of his life, he goes out with a friend walking to those old places that is called Gondolif Wood, where he finds the place where they found the old ruins that seemingly should have been going all the way back to the first times of the Danes. The place is a kind of burial site in the wood near Soru, and he has visited it with his friend, a historian, and he comes back and is really touched by seeing these ruins, the stone ruins and big stones as kind of a burial site for some of the important old day giants that they imagine has been around there, or maybe it was made for the gods, as the mythology would tell, that this is the place where they offered or gave the gods their memories and contact. And so he starts writing about this wood and that place and how it becomes magical because of those sleeping giants in it, and because um, what has been walking in it in that, and now he's walking there using his own footsteps to go the same way, and he can feel these sleeping gods and the sleeping giants in his past awakened, and it's like he has taken some of their powers with him back. And so by connecting that history to himself and giving it on, he is renewing and bringing back to life everything that is in that sleeping forest and those woods around it, and the stones that has been surrounding it. And so he ends his poem called The Woods of Gondeslew by saying, I am shaking of pleasancy, and that sacred prayers that is in my chest, I am rushing and rushing with feathers, winged feathers, and to the altar of the Aesors to throw myself down and praise those sleeping gods over there. In that way, he becomes awakened as a romantic from that love story and from the connection with the past. He finds a part of himself that is really intense and given over in those poems that he's writing to us and to the time after him, awakening something very special in him and a realization that's going to follow him the rest of his life. History has been enchanted, and so has the nature around him, and so has his feelings. Everything gets in that circle of enchantment. All of a sudden, feelings he hadn't had so strong and so present as it is now, and that strengthened his feeling of his special nature and also the nature of human beings, actually. Because in that way, he is actually just telling us that, well, there are great forces beyond what we can reason with our minds. They can only be felt by the presence of that thing and that target that you're going for. So when he saw that woman, Constance, and fell in love with her, something shook him up very, very deeply. That's not to be taken lightly at all, and he had to really use a lot of power to get away from doing anything wrong or following that feeling that he should, and that gave him a great pain and a great disturbance, because he really wanted that as well. He was madly in love with her, but he had to put himself together, and so he could only do that by the will of turning away to something else stronger and bigger and deeper. And the only other thing in his life was to turn to God and the nature that God has created outside him. And that's the period of the Romanticism. And the same happened some years later in 1808 when he went to that wood visiting those places of the historical value. Something was just enlightened in him and connected and awakened in his spirit that has been slumbering or not been really aware of. And that's what's about Grundtvig and the part of him that has been touched by Romanticism, that he could really get these intense feelings, but also tell us about them in his poems. He could direct these feelings into something that makes sense, or maybe put together in words, using the power of nature around him, the power of history behind him, and the power in himself to give us a view of the footsteps that's coming and what we could look forward to. And so in the next part, we're going to speak more about this giant as a mythologist, as the one who turns back to the Nordic old stories and myth of where the Nordic people came from and what kind of gods they have worshipped, and try to combine that with his present time Christianity and his feelings as being a Dane. And this can be contradictory as well for many people who has left these ideas. So we're going to look into that in the next talk.